The day started with a minor explosion. In Elysium Nexus, minor explosions were considered polite conversation starters. Yara Kestrel leaned back in her grease-stained chair, strands of unkempt hair sticking to her forehead, and surveyed the wreckage like a tired god surveying creation after a particularly rough bender. "Well," she said, tossing a wrench into the pile of scrap with a clatter that echoed down the metallic corridors, "that's one way to wake up." Her workshop was a chaotic symphony of sparks and smoke, a place where physics and common sense came to die. The kind of place that screamed fire hazard but whispered genius if you listened closely enough, and if you didn't mind the occasional shrapnel. Yara's workspace was a shrine to things that almost worked. "You know this is the third time this week, right?" came a voice from the doorway. Yara didn't have to look up to know it was Felix, her nonchalantly loyal friend whose only discernible skill was pointing out the obvious. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, trying his best to look like he wasn't impressed. "Third time's the charm, they say," Yara retorted, wiping her hands on a rag that only spread the grease around more evenly. "Or maybe that's just a lie we tell ourselves to justify bad decisions." Felix snorted, stepping over a pile of dubious-looking circuits. "You sure you're not just trying to blow up the Nexus so you can get a week off?" Yara grinned, the kind of grin that dared the universe to try her. "If I wanted a vacation, I'd ask the aliens for a ride. I hear their brain-scanning tech is all the rage." The joke hung in the air, dark and heavy like the smog that sometimes seeped in from the Nexus's less savory sectors. Aliens. Always a fun topic, especially when you lived in a place like this. Elysium Nexus, the jewel of human engineering and optimism, or so the brochures claimed. A teleportation hub that linked countless worlds where you could step through a door and end up anywhere. If you were lucky, you'd even arrive with all your limbs attached. But Yara knew better. She'd seen the schematics, the blueprints, the parts that didn't quite fit. Elysium Nexus was held together by duct tape and prayer, and not the good kind. And lately, something was off. More off than usual, which was saying something. So, what was it this time? "Alien interference," Felix asked, picking up a scorched piece of metal and examining it with mild interest like a tourist at a particularly disappointing theme park. Yara shrugged, an art form in itself. "Could be. Could also be the usual sabotage, or maybe the universe just hates us. Take your pick." Felix dropped the metal back onto the table with a clatter. Always good to have options. They both knew it was more than just a malfunction. Recently, things had been going wrong more often than usual, and Yara had a hunch it wasn't just because of the Nexus's usual quirks. "Speaking of options," Yara said, pulling up a holographic interface with a flick of her wrist, "I found something interesting in the logs last night. A pattern. Someone or something is messing with our teleportation grids, and it ain't for funsies." Felix perked up, his interest shifting from sarcastic to genuine. "Aliens again, because I gotta tell you, if they're planning a hostile takeover, they picked a hell of a fixer-upper." Yara chuckled, scrolling through streams of data, her eyes darting like those of a gambler on a losing streak. "Might be, or maybe they're just bored. Either way, if they think they can turn us into digital puppets, they've got another thing coming." Yara's fingers danced across the controls, and Felix watched as the data coalesced into something akin to a conspiracy theorist's wet dream. Aberrations, anomalies, spikes in energy readings that could only be caused by technology far beyond human comprehension, or a really pissed-off squirt. Given the state of Elysium Nexus, either was possible. "You really think the aliens are trying to digitize us?" Felix asked, his tone more serious now, the humor slipping like a mask. Yara nodded, her expression grim but with a hint of excitement. The kind of excitement that only came when you realized you were onto something big, or when you were about to get hit by a freight train. "I do. And if we don't stop them, we might all end up as ones and zeros in some intergalactic hard drive." Felix mulled that over, scratching at the stubble that perpetually coated his jaw. "So, what's the plan? Besides sarcasm and the occasional explosion, Yara leaned back, crossing her arms with a smirk that could cut steel. We find out what they are up to, and we make sure it blows up in their faces instead of yours. Old school style. Old school? What with actual explosives? Felix asked, unable to suppress the grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. You know me too well, Yara said, already back to tinkering with a particularly stubborn circuit board. The lights flickered ominously, as if the Nexus itself was shuddering at the thought of what Yara had planned. But that was just part of the charm of living here. You got used to the idea that the place might kill you, or worse, bore you to death. Yara tossed Felix a set of tools. Start by checking the auxiliary circuits. If anything's going to give us away, it's those. Felix caught the tools with surprising dexterity, his face a mask of mock resignation. You know, I could have been a bartender. Nice, safe job. Get to hear everyone's dirty secrets without having to save the world from alien overlords. Yeah, but then you wouldn't get to hang out with me, Yara shot back, already lost in her work again, wires and circuits forming a chaotic halo around her. Felix sighed with exaggerated drama, heading towards the auxiliary panel. True. And where would I be without your charming company and death-defying plans? As Felix set to work, Yara continued her tinkering, thoughts swirling like a storm. The Nexus was on the brink of something massive, and not in the usual we might all die because a flux capacitor blew away. The kind of massive that could end humanity as they knew it or propel them into a strange new future. Maybe both. And here she was, a disgruntled engineer with a knack for explosions, smack dab in the middle of it all. You ever think we're just too damn stubborn for our own good? Felix asked, not looking up from his work. All the time, Yara replied, a smirk playing on her lips. But then, where's the fun in being sensible? Their laughter echoed off the metal walls, a brief moment of levity in a world that seemed intent on spiraling into chaos. Yara knew the stakes were high, knew that if they didn't play their cards right, the Nexus could become ground zero for an alien plot that would turn humanity into nothing more than data. And yet, she felt a thrill she couldn't quite deny. After all, what was life without a bit of danger? The conversation was cut short as a klaxon blared through the workshop, harsh and grating like a particularly persistent hangover. Yara shot up, eyes narrowing at the flashing warning lights. What now? She muttered, crossing the workshop to a console that was beeping like an overexcited droid. Felix followed, wiping his hands on his shirt. If it's another power surge, I swear I'm going to. Not a surge, Yara interrupted, her fingers flying over the console as her eyes scanned the incoming data. It's a breach. One of the teleportation gates just went haywire. Felix blinked, his usual sarcasm momentarily replaced by genuine concern. Haywire how? Yara stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. As in, something came through. And it wasn't on the schedule. Felix looked at her, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared understanding. This was it. The aliens were making their move, and it was up to them to stop it. The lights flickered again, and Yara felt a chill run down her spine. The kind of chill that told you everything was about to go very, very wrong. We need to get down there, she said, grabbing her tool belt and slinging it over her shoulder. Before they turned the whole station into a ghost town, Felix nodded, already moving towards the door. You got a plan? Same as always, Yara replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Improvise and hope we don't get incinerated. Sounds like a plan, Felix said, a grin spreading across his face as they headed out into the chaos of the Nexus. Together, they raced through the labyrinthine corridors of Elysium Nexus, their footsteps echoing in the dimly lit passages as they made their way towards the teleportation gate at the heart of it all. The station seemed to pulse around them, alive and aware, like a beast stirring from slumber. Yara's mind was a whirlwind of calculations and contingencies, plans forming and dissolving with each step. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but also the thrill of it, the promise of something extraordinary on the horizon. As they approached the gate, the air crackled with energy, the hum of alien machinery filling the space like a malevolent song. Yara glanced at Felix, who gave her a nod, his usual humor tempered by the seriousness of what lay ahead. "Ready?" she asked, her voice a low whisper, barely audible over the chaos. "Ready as I'll ever be," Felix replied, his eyes locked on the swirling energies of the gate where something otherworldly lurked just beyond the threshold. Yara took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. This was it, the moment when everything would change one way or another. With a final nod to Felix, she stepped forward into the maelstrom, ready to face whatever awaited them on the other side. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and for better or worse, Yara Kestrel was determined to see it through. As Yara and Felix barreled down the Nexus corridors like two mismatched comets on a collision course, the station seemed to lurch and groan around them. It was the kind of noise you'd expect from an ancient metal beast that was one power surge away from a complete existential breakdown. But that was just another Tuesday at Elysium Nexus. "Ever wonder why we bother fixing this place?" Felix huffed, narrowly avoiding a precariously hanging conduit. "Because we're idiots. Or maybe we just like a challenge," Yara shot back, dodging a loose pipe that jutted out like a particularly aggressive middle finger from the universe. The teleportation gate chamber loomed ahead, its entrance framed by flickering lights that didn't so much invite you in as threatened to collapse at any moment. Stepping inside, Yara felt the raw energy licking at her skin like a pack of invisible wolves, the air heavy with the scent of overheated circuits and impending doom. "Welcome to the belly of the beast," Felix muttered, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting an alien to leap out and offer him a cup of tea, or a blaster to the face. Both were equally probable. At the center of the chaos stood Quinox, an alien who looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a disgruntled librarian. Its translucent form shimmered with hues that suggested a bad day at the paint factory, tendrils moving with an unsettling grace. "Ah, the human mechanic," Quinox greeted, its voice resonating in Yara's head like an unwanted broadcast of galactic news. "And her companion." "Pleasant, Quinox," Yara said, folding her arms with the kind of authority you only got from having nothing left to lose. "Last time I checked, we didn't schedule a meeting with a cosmic jelly." Quinox's tendrils rippled, a gesture Yara assumed was meant to be intimidating but looked more like a particularly floppy interpretive dance. "There are pressing matters at hand, Yara Kestrel. Your species is in grave danger." "Tell me something I don't know," Yara replied, her voice flat. In the Nexus, danger was as common as a leaky pipe and twice as annoying. "The synth echelon," Quinox continued, ignoring her sarcasm with the practiced ease of someone used to being ignored, "has initiated a plan to strip humanity of its creativity. Without creativity, you will become predictable, controllable." Felix raised an eyebrow, glancing at Yara. "So basically they want to turn us into bureaucrats," Yara snorted. "Figures. Who needs laser cannons when you can just bore us to death?" Quinox's tendrils twitched in what might have been an attempt at a sympathetic nod. "This is no jest, human. The Echelon sees your creativity as a wild card, a threat to their order. They intend to drain it, leaving you hollow." Yara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the malfunctioning climate control. "Okay, so how do we stop them? And please tell me it involves explosions. I'm a little short on those today." "Disruption," Quinox said, its form flickering like an old holovid on the fritz. "The plan is being executed through the malfunctioning gates. You must recalibrate the core." Felix tugged at his earlobe, skepticism etched into his face. "Recalibrate the core. Sounds like one of those plans that gets us both fried or worse." "Look, Felix," Yara said, her eyes locked onto the alien, "we've got two choices. Do nothing and become mindless drones, or try to save the universe and possibly blow ourselves up. At least the second option sounds exciting. And here I was hoping for a quiet life," Felix muttered, his sarcasm a shield against the insanity of their situation. Yara turned back to Quinox, who remained as unfazed as a rock in a river. Any tips on recalibrating this thing? Or do we just wing it and hope for the best? Quinox's tendrils pulsed, its version of a shrug. The core's control module is at the heart of the station. You must reroute its energy and neutralize the synthesizing resonance. Neutralize the what now? Felix asked, scratching his head. That sounds like technobabble for good luck, you're on your own. Essentially, yes, Quinox confirmed, offering no more comfort than a particularly unhelpful instruction manual. Yara rolled her eyes, a gesture as much for her benefit as Felix's. Guess we better get to it then. We're overdue for a miracle. As they moved to leave, the air around them crackled, and Yara noticed something peculiar. Tiny glitches seemed to dance in the periphery of her vision, a flash of static here, a brief distortion there, like reality itself was having a bit of a breakdown. "Hey, Felix," she said, stopping mid-stride. "You seeing this?" Felix nodded slowly, eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. "Yeah, it's like the universe is buffering. Think that's part of the plan." "Could be," Yara said, rubbing her temples. "Or maybe reality's just tired of our crap." They navigated the corridors with a renewed urgency, the stakes crystallized in their minds. Each step seemed to sink to a countdown they could neither see nor hear, but felt in their bones. Or maybe that was just the caffeine wearing off. Small glitches continued to pepper their journey, lights faltering, walls shimmering like mirages, snippets of conversations from nowhere. Yara didn't know if it was more disconcerting or just another day in this cosmic mess. "You know," Felix said as they ducked past a malfunctioning bulkhead door, "if I end up as a mindless drone, at least I won't have to worry about my credit score." "Silver linings," Yara agreed, not missing a step. Finally, they reached the core's control room. It was quieter here, the air thick with the hum of machinery that made Yara's skin prickle. In the center, the control module loomed, a tangled mess of wires and panels that looked about as user-friendly as a rabid dog. "So, how do we not blow this up?" Felix asked, surveying the mess with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Yara cracked her knuckles, contemplating the chaos. "First things first, we need to reroute the energy flow. Find the main conduit and we'll see if we can't make this thing sing." Together, they set to work, Felix handling the auxiliary systems while Yara wrestled with the core controls. It was the kind of job that required the patience of a saint and the nerves of a bomb disposal expert. Unfortunately, Yara was neither, but she made do with a healthy mix of skill and stubbornness. As they toiled, the control room seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the glitches more pronounced now, like static on a broken holo display. Yara felt a bead of sweat trickle down her neck, the weight of the task pressing down on her. "Okay," she muttered, more to herself than Felix. "Just a few more tweaks and we might actually have a shot at." The room shuddered violently, cutting her off mid-sentence. A display screen crackled to life, and for a moment Yara could have sworn she saw a human face before it dissolved back into noise. "Did you see that?" Felix asked, his voice taut, eyes wide as dinner plates. "Yeah," Yara replied, her own heart racing. "And I have a feeling it's not just a glitch." "What do you think it is?" Felix asked, returning to the controls with renewed urgency. "Maybe it's the echelon," Yara speculated, her fingers never stopping. "Or maybe the Nexus is trying to tell us something." With a final adjustment, Yara stepped back, holding her breath. The core's hum intensified, the room vibrating with pent-up energy. For a moment, time seemed to hang in the air, suspended by the thinnest of threads. And then, with a suddenness that left them both reeling, the glitches stopped. The room fell silent, the core's hum settling into a steady, reassuring rhythm. "I think we did it," Yara said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Felix let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Nice work. Now let's get out of here before we find out we missed something." As they made their way back through the corridors, Felix glanced sideways at Yara. "So, what's the next step in your master plan, O Queen of Chaos?" Yara smirked, shrugging as if the weight of the world wasn't perched precariously on her shoulders. "Survive. and maybe grab a drink. I think we've earned it. Now there's a plan I can get behind, Felix said, relief coloring his words. As they retraced their steps, Yara couldn't shake the feeling that the threat was far from over. Quinox's warning still echoed in her mind, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. But for now, they'd bought themselves some time, and that was enough, at least until the next crisis reared its ugly head. Together, they disappeared into the shadows of the Nexus, two unlikely heroes navigating a universe that seemed determined to test them at every turn. And if that meant a few explosions, well, Yara was more than ready to oblige. Yara Kestrel took a deep breath, the kind that made her question why she ever thought working on the Elysium Nexus was a good idea. Sure, a job's a job, but jobs where the station might decide to implode without notice were overrated. She and Felix had just prevented the cosmic equivalent of a lobotomy for the human race, a win she planned to celebrate with grim acceptance and maybe a half-decent cup of synth coffee. Unfortunately, the station had other plans. As if to mock their brief moment of triumph, the whole place decided to have a fit. The Nexus was alive with chaos, lights flickering like a disco on bad acid and klaxons blaring in a disharmonious choir. "Great," Felix muttered, ducking as a panel spewed sparks. "Does this place ever just work?" "Welcome to my world," Yara replied, swatting a tangle of wires out of the way. "Where a good day means you only almost die." They stumbled into the main hub, a vast space normally filled with people minding their own business. But now, it looked like someone had kicked over an anthill. Humans, aliens, and a few beings Yara couldn't quite categorize dashed around, each trying to outpanic the other. Amidst the chaos, she spotted Zane, a cryptographer she'd worked with on a few jobs that involved more dodging bullets than decoding messages. He was the sort of guy who could find a pattern in a pile of spaghetti, but still couldn't find his own socks. "Zane," Yara called, waving him over. He weaved through the crowd, narrowly avoiding a particularly irate cyborg. "Yara." "Fancy meeting you in this disaster," Zane said, grinning like a man who lived for this level of absurdity. "I assume you're here to save the day." "Something like that," she replied, crossing her arms. "You got any idea why the station's having a digital seizure?" He shrugged with a nonchalance that suggested he might just be the calmest person in the universe. "Could be the usual glitches, sabotage, or maybe the Nexus just wants to keep us on our toes." "Helpful as ever," Yara said with a wry smile. "Got any friends who won't just add to the chaos?" Zane snapped his fingers. "Actually, there's Leora, a painter of all things. She's got a knack for seeing what others miss. Might be useful if the station's got a hidden message for us." "A painter," Felix interjected, skepticism thick in his voice. "Because nothing says high-tech crisis like a good landscape." "Hey, art is about perspective," Zane shot back. "Besides, she's sharper than she looks." With a resigned nod, Yara followed Zane through the maelstrom to where Leora stood, a splash of color in the otherwise gray turmoil. She was tall, with hair dyed in a riot of colors that put the Nexus's light show to shame. Her eyes were sharp, taking in the chaos with an artist's appreciation for the absurd. "Yara, Felix, meet Leora," Zane introduced. "Our resident creative genius." Leora gave a mock salute. "Guess that makes me the unofficial tour guide to this hellscape." "What are we looking for?" "Anything that screams I'm the source of your problems," Yara said dryly. "We're hoping to find evidence of alien interference." "Alien interference, huh?" Leora mused, scanning the hub with an artist's eye. "Well, the station's definitely trying to tell us something, that or it really hates its job." Together, they moved deeper into the hub, navigating through the chaos with a semblance of purpose. As they walked, tiny glitches peppered their vision, visual artifacts that danced around the edges, as if reality itself was a badly tuned holo-vid. Zane paused beside a flickering panel, his cryptographer instincts piqued. "There's a pattern to these glitches, almost like digital breadcrumbs." Yara glanced over his shoulder, noting the recurring symbols that flared briefly before vanishing. "Looks like the station's got a secret. Think you can crack it? With pleasure, Zane replied, pulling out a device that looked like it belonged in a junkyard. Keep an eye out for anything that might want to eat us. Terrific, Felix muttered, scanning the surrounding chaos. Because it's not like this place is crawling with enough maniacs already. Leora, meanwhile, was sketching in a notepad, her movements rapid and fluid. Yara watched as images began to form, abstract yet somehow familiar, a visual representation of the glitches, she realized. Got something? Yara asked, intrigued despite herself. Leora nodded, eyes focused on her drawing. It's like the Nexus is bleeding. Each glitch is a wound. We're looking at a digital infection. Charming, Felix quipped. Do we get to play doctors, or is this more of a watch it die slowly scenario? Zane's fingers flew over his device, piecing together the digital puzzle. There's interference coming from multiple sources, all converging on the central systems. It's like someone's trying to hack a brain while giving it a lobotomy. Guess we'll need to head to the source, Yara concluded. Because that sounds like our friendly neighborhood synth echelon. They moved as a group, forging a path through the throng of panicked station dwellers. Yara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that somewhere in the myriad of eyes and screens, something was tracking their every move. Anyone else feel like we're being followed? She asked, voice low. We're the only ones here not losing our minds, Felix replied. Makes us stand out like a sore thumb. Great, Yara muttered, tightening her grip on her tool kit. Just what we need, more attention. In the heart of the chaos, Zane led them to a maintenance corridor, the din of the hub fading into the background. The walls here were scrawled with the kind of graffiti that suggested someone was either deeply philosophical or deeply unhinged. Charming decor, Leora remarked, tracing a finger over a particularly cryptic piece. Almost makes you forget we're one bad day away from imploding. They reached a junction where the corridor split, Zane pausing to consult his device. If I'm right, and I usually am, we should be close. The main terminal's just ahead. Yara nodded, taking the lead as they navigated the maze-like corridors. The further they went, the stronger the sense of wrongness grew, like an itch they couldn't scratch. When they finally reached the terminal, it was a sight to behold. A sprawling array of screens and interfaces, all flickering with data that seemed to swim like fish in a digital sea. It was beautiful in a way that only an engineer could truly appreciate. Looks like we've found the brain, Felix said, stepping back as Zane approached the console. Let's see what secrets it's hiding, Zane murmured, connecting his device to the terminal with a practiced motion. As he worked, the screen flared to life, streams of code rushing past faster than the eye could follow. Yara watched, biting her lip as the tension ratcheted up another notch. Anything good? Leora asked, peering over Zane's shoulder. More like something bad, he replied, eyes narrowing at the data. There are traces of a program alien in origin embedded in the system. It's like a digital parasite feeding off the Nexus's energy. Can we remove it? Yara asked, voice tight with urgency. Not without risking a full system collapse, Zane admitted, frustration evident in his tone. Perfect, Felix sighed. So we're stuck with a parasite and a station that's one hiccup away from blowing up. Yara ran a hand through her hair, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her. We need to find a way to neutralize it. Otherwise, we're all just ticking time bombs. Zane continued to work, his device whirring softly as it sifted through the alien code. The program's sophisticated, but it has weak points. We might be able to isolate it, cut it off from the main systems. How long will that take? Yara asked, her patience wearing thin. Hard to say, Zane admitted, but it's better than waiting for the whole place to go up in flames. As they strategized, Leora's eyes roved over the terminal, her artist's mind searching for patterns. If the code's a parasite, then we need something to counteract it, like an antidote. Yara raised an eyebrow. And where do we find one of those? The local pharmacy. Not exactly, Leora replied, her voice thoughtful. But maybe the station has its own defenses, something we can use to fight back. Zane looked up, intrigued. A countermeasure. If we can access the Nexus's native protocols, we might be able to initiate a purge. Now you're talking my language, Yara said, her mind racing with possibilities. But we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the worse it gets. With renewed determination, they set to work, each playing to their strengths. Zane focused on isolating the alien code, while Yara and Leora scoured the terminal for any sign of the station's own defenses. As the seconds ticked by, the air grew thick with anticipation. Yara could feel the weight of the entire station bearing down on them, a reminder of how precarious their situation truly was. And then, finally, a breakthrough. Zane let out a triumphant shout, thrusting his device into the air. Got it! An access point to the Nexus's security protocols. Let's light this place up, Yara said, her pulse quickening with adrenaline. Together, they accessed the protocols, navigating the labyrinthine system with a precision born of desperation. It was a race against time, each second a reminder of the stakes. Felix kept watch, eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. You know, he said, voice light with humor, if we pull this off, I might just believe in miracles. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Yara replied, though her lips twitched into a smile. The terminal's interface glowed with a soft, reassuring light, the alien code blinking out one by one. Bit by bit, they were purging the parasite, reclaiming the station's autonomy. Finally, with a last flourish, Zane hit the execute command. The terminal shuddered, the screens flickering before falling still. A moment of silence followed, a calm after the storm. Did it work? Leora asked, eyes wide with hope. Yara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. I think it did. The station's stable, at least for now. Felix leaned against the wall, relief washing over him. That's the best news I've heard all day. But we're not out of the woods yet, Zane cautioned. The echelon won't stop just because we gave them a bloody nose. Then we'll be ready, Yara said, determination etched in her voice. Because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. As they gathered their things and prepared to head back to the hub, Yara felt a renewed sense of purpose. They'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. And if the synth echelon wanted to play, they damn well better be ready for a fight. Together, they stepped back into the chaos of the Nexus, ready to face whatever nightmare awaited them next. Because in a universe that thrived on chaos, Yara Kestrel had learned one thing above all else. Survival was just the beginning. The Elysium Nexus was having a day like any other, by which I mean it was falling apart at the seams. Yara Kestrel stood next to a sputtering conduit, listening to its ominous clattering like it was a ticking time bomb. This place was a monument not to human ingenuity, but to the persistence of Murphy's Law. Think it might be trying to tell us something? Felix asked, nudging Yara and squinting at the conduit like it had personally offended him. Yeah, Yara replied. It's saying, why the hell did you decide to work in a place where explosions are the soundtrack of your life? A flash overhead and the lights flickered, the station's version of a nervous tick. Felix muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse. Lucky us, Yara said. The station still got its disco lights working. As if to punctuate her point, another spark rained down, making Yara curse and step back. Just another day in paradise, where the only thing more consistent than the chaos was her questionable life choices. They moved, as always, with a blend of urgency and resigned acceptance. The hub was a hive of anxious activity, station dwellers darting around like ants who just lost the way to the sugar pile. Yara couldn't blame them. When your home had more malfunctions than a politician had scandals, panic was the default mode. Does anyone else feel like a bug under a magnifying glass? Yara asked as they cut through the crowd. Just you, Felix replied. You're famous for your paranoia, Yara chuckled. Keeps me alive. Ahead, Zane was already at work, hunched over a console like a digital witch doctor. He was staring with the kind of intensity a cat saves for a particularly stubborn laser dot. Found anything interesting? Yara asked, stepping up beside him. Define interesting, Zane replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. If by interesting you mean alien tech wedged into our systems like an unwanted houseguest, then yes, I have. Yara's eyebrows shot up. Alien tech, here. Yep, hidden like a really bad Easter egg. It's tied into the Nexus's core functions like some kind of digital parasite. Felix snorted. Great. The station's not just malfunctioning, it's possessed. At least that explains the attitude, Yara deadpanned. As they gathered around the console, Quinox hovered into view, his gelatinous form pulsing with an unsettling rhythm. His presence was like a librarian who'd discovered you were overdue on a dozen books. Quinox, Yara greeted, not bothering to hide her suspicion. You're just in time. Any chance you've seen something like this before? The alien glowed a pale blue, communicating telepathically. The technology is unfamiliar to me. However, it is clear that its design is not benign. No kidding, Zane muttered, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. It's like someone took a joyride through our systems and decided to stay. Yara studied Quinox for a moment. The alien had been on the Nexus longer than most, and while he was usually as helpful as a bureaucrat on holiday, there was something in his metallic gaze today that set her teeth on edge. Can we dismantle it? Leora asked, appearing like an apparition at Yara's side, sketchbook in hand. We can try, Zane said, but it's like surgery on a hand grenade. One wrong cut and kaboom, no more Elysium Nexus. Reassuring, Felix said. And here I thought we were just one bad day away from exploding. It's not all doom and gloom, Yara said with a wry smile. At least we'll go out with a bang. They set to work, a motley crew of misfits, each playing their part in the grand farce that was station maintenance. Yara and Felix kept watch while Zane and Leora delved into the alien tech like archaeologists on a dig with a ticking deadline. The hub was a cacophony of noise, yet Yara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Like the shadows themselves had eyes, and they were all staring at her with barely concealed disdain. All right, let's see what you've got hidden in there, Zane murmured, probing the device with a tool that looked suspiciously more like a fork than anything technological. As he worked, Quinox drifted closer, his silent presence hovering like a bad smell. Do you have something to add, or are you just enjoying the show? Yara asked, trying to sound casual. Quinox's glow shifted, his mental voice brushing against her consciousness like cold fog. There is much you do not understand, Yara Kestrel. Is that supposed to be news? She shot back. I'm just trying to keep this place from tearing itself apart. The alien was silent for a moment, and Yara was left with the distinct impression of being weighed and measured. Then unexpectedly Quinox shimmered, his form flickering like a bad holovid. Quinox, Felix asked, frowning. You okay there? And then it happened. Quinox's form steadied, his eyes locking onto Yara with an intensity that made her stomach twist. You are too late. Before Yara could react, Quinox's tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Zane's neck and lifting him off his feet. Traitor, Yara shouted, scrambling to pull a wrench from her belt. Felix lunged towards Quinox, only to be slammed back by a telekinetic force, crashing into the wall with a grunt. Quinox, what the hell are you doing? Leora yelled, horror crossing her features. Zane gasped, clawing at the tendrils as his device clattered to the floor. Stop! This! He choked out, his face turning an alarming shade of red. Yara swung the wrench, but Quinox flicked it away with a mere thought, his focus never wavering. The Nexus is already compromised, Quinox said, his mental voice devoid of any remorse. I have merely accelerated the process. You're working with them, aren't you? Yara accused, heart pounding in her chest. The Echelon seeks to evolve to transcend this crude existence, Quinox replied. Your struggle is futile. We'll see about that, Yara growled, eyes darting around for anything to use as a weapon. Quinox's grip tightened and Zane's struggles weakened. It was as if time slowed, the chaos around them fading into the background. Then, out of nowhere, a loud clang echoed through the hub. The tendrils slackened as Quinox shuddered, a dark stain spreading across his side from where Felix had, against all odds, wedged a metal beam through the alien's body. "Still think it's futile," Felix spat, clutching his side where he'd hit the wall. Quinox's glow dimmed, his form flickering like a dying light bulb. "You are too late," he rasped, his telepathic voice growing faint. With a final shudder, Quinox released Zane, who collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "Well, that escalated quickly," Felix said, leaning heavily against the console. "Yeah," Yara agreed, crouching to check on Zane, who was coughing but otherwise seemed intact. "What the hell was that about?" Leora asked, her voice shaky. Zane, still catching his breath, looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and clarity. "Quinox wasn't just a traitor," he said, voice hoarse. "He was a part of their plan. The Echelon's been using him to keep tabs on the station. And now we know why the Nexus has been falling apart," Yara concluded, piecing it together. "Quinox was sabotaging us from the inside." Felix shook his head, wincing. "I'd say that explains a lot, but honestly I didn't need the added paranoia." Zane struggled to his feet, supported by Yara. "We need to act fast. Whatever Quinox set in motion, we have to stop it." "So what's the plan?" Leora asked, eyes darting around as if expecting more betrayals from the shadows. "The alien device," Zane said, pointing to the console. "It's the key to everything. We need to either disable it or find a way to turn it against them." "And if that doesn't work?" Felix asked, not entirely joking. "Then we're screwed," Yara said with a grim smile. "But I'd rather go down fighting than let these bastards win." With a renewed sense of urgency, they turned their attention back to the device. Every second counted, each moment a reminder of how close they were to losing everything. But as they worked, Yara felt a flicker of hope. They'd been betrayed, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. And as long as she had breath in her body, she was going to make damn sure the Echelon regretted ever setting their sights on the Elysium Nexus. Yara Kestrel surveyed the teleportation hub, feeling the weight of doom clinging to her like the stench of burnt synth coffee. The room was a riot of flickering lights and sparking conduits, barely holding itself together, much like her dwindling patience. The place was an interstellar dance floor, one slip away from collapsing into chaos, and she was the unwilling DJ tasked with fixing the sound system. "Looks like we've hit the jackpot in Hell's Casino," Felix muttered, nursing his side where Quinox had flung him like a wet rag. "Yeah, and it's all you can lose," Yara replied, her voice laced with dark amusement. "If we don't get this under control, we'll be the main attraction in the galaxy's shortest-lived fireworks show." Zane, still looking like he'd gone a few rounds with a particularly evil vacuum cleaner, was hunched over the alien device. "This thing's wired into everything," he said, voice hoarse but determined. "Disconnecting it could shut down the station, or worse." "Define worse," Felix said, with a crooked grin that was mostly plastered on to hide the pain. "Worse as in boom," Zane replied, deadpan, "and not the fun kind." "Great," Yara said. "Our options are death by shutdown or death by explosion. Can we just choose the one where we don't die?" As if on cue, the lights above flickered violently, casting the room into a disorienting strobe. A siren wailed in the distance, the station's cry of impending doom, or maybe just someone getting creative with the fire alarm again. "Feels like a love letter from management," Felix quipped. "All the charm of a breakup text written in Morse code." "Focus," Yara snapped, though she couldn't help the twitch of a smile. "Zane, any ideas on how we turn this nightmare into a mildly uncomfortable dream?" Zane adjusted the settings on his console, his hands moving with the precision of someone defusing a bomb while blindfolded. "If we can reroute the power surge to the auxiliary systems, we might stabilize the core, but it's risky." "Risky," Felix echoed, shaking his head. "You know how to sell it, don't you?" "Since when has anything we've done not been risky?" Yara said, moving to help Zane. "We live on a station that considers minor explosions a friendly greeting." As they worked, Yara's mind drifted back to Quinox's betrayal, the alien's dismissal a bitter reminder of how fragile alliances could be. The echelon's grip on the station ran deeper than they'd realized, wrapping around them like a noose. But if they were going down, she'd make sure they'd at least give the bastards a black eye on the way out. Felix stood guard while Leora, recovered from the shock, began sketching on her pad with a frenetic energy. When the historians find this, they'll wonder why our last stand looks like a Picasso fever dream. They'll probably just blame it on faulty wiring, Yara said, focusing on the task at hand. Or maybe they'll think we were just a bunch of lunatics. Isn't that what we are? Zane asked, a hint of a smile on his lips. Speak for yourself, Felix said, his tone mock-offended. I am a professional. Professional what? Leora asked, arching an eyebrow. Professional cynic, Felix shot back. Come on, who else do you know who can complain this consistently? The banter was a thin veneer over the tension, an attempt to keep the creeping dread at bay. Beneath the jokes and jabs, each of them knew the stakes. The station was on the brink, and they only had a slim chance to pull it back from the edge. As Yara worked, her gaze fell upon a dusty console tucked away in a corner, its screen flickering with erratic symbols. What's that? She asked, nodding towards it. Old archive access, Zane said, glancing over. Supposed to be decommissioned ages ago. Curiosity piqued. Yara wiped a layer of grime off the screen, tapping through the menus. What she found made her pause. It was a treasure trove of old Earth culture, music, films, literature, all stored away and forgotten in the station's neglected corners. Jackpot, she muttered, a smile tugging at her lips. Felix glanced over, curious. What you find? Another way to kill us faster? No, Yara said, an unexpected warmth spreading through her. Something better. A reminder of why we're fighting. She pulled up a video file, and the strains of an ancient song filled the room, a melody from Earth that spoke of hope and defiance. It was a small thing, a whisper of the past, but it reignited a spark she'd almost forgotten was there. Think it'll scare the echelon away if we play them some oldies, Felix joked, though his eyes softened as he listened. Zane paused in his work, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Maybe we can bore them to death with Shakespeare, or show them the Star Wars prequels, Leora added, smirking. That'll do it, Yara chuckled, feeling some of the weight lift from her shoulders. They were up against a wall, but they weren't beaten yet. As long as they had each other, they had a chance. All right, enough nostalgia, she said, closing the archive. Let's get back to work. We've got a station to save. The mood was lighter, a shared determination settling over the group. They moved with renewed purpose, every action a rebellion against the despair that threatened to swallow them whole. Felix watched the screens, eyes sharp for any sign of approaching danger. You know, if we pull this off, drinks are on me. On you? Yara asked, arching an eyebrow. Sure, Felix replied, shrugging. I'll just expense it to the echelon. They worked in near silence, punctuated by the occasional curse or joke. Zane's fingers danced across the console, weaving a digital tapestry that would either save them or doom them. Here goes nothing, Zane said, taking a deep breath. I'm rerouting the power now. The room seemed to hold its breath as he tapped the final command. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The cacophony of alarms quieted, replaced by a steady hum as the station began to recover. Did it work? Leora asked, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. Zane checked the readouts, a slow grin spreading across his face. Looks like it. We've got some stability back. Yara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For now, at least. Well, that was anticlimactic, Felix said, though his relief was palpable. Does this mean I can start relaxing? Not yet, Yara warned, though she was smiling. There's still the small matter of undoing whatever else Quinox set in motion. Zane nodded, already moving to the next task. We need to check the network for any other surprises. Then let's get to it, Yara said, feeling the adrenaline kick back in. We've still got work to do. The task was daunting, the odds still stacked against them, but they'd taken a step forward. And sometimes in the darkest hours, that was all you could do, take one step then another, until the dawn finally broke. As they resumed their work, Yara couldn't help but think of the archive she'd found. a reminder that they were more than the sum of their parts, more than the chaos that surrounded them. They were human, damn it, and nobody was going to take that from them, not without a fight. "Hey, Yara," Felix said suddenly, breaking the silence. "When this is all over, let's watch one of those movies. Something with explosions and bad acting." "Why wait?" Yara replied, a mischievous glint in her eye. "We've got all the bad acting we need right here." Felix laughed, and for a moment the hub felt a little less like a tomb and more like a place worth saving. The echelon might have given them hell, but they'd give it right back. And with any luck, they'd live to see that promised drink after all. As the station continued its slow return to normalcy, or whatever passed for it on the Elysium Nexus, Yara Kestrel knew they were far from safe. But in the grim darkness of space, she'd take whatever victory she could get, even if it was just the chance to fight another day. And fight they would, because at the end of the universe, all you had was hope, humor, and a team of misfits who refused to quit. Yara Kestrel surveyed the chaos of the Elysium Nexus with the sort of grim resignation one might reserve for discovering a cockroach in their synth coffee. It was the kind of place where the air tasted faintly of singed electronics and despair. Yet somehow, against all odds, she and her motley crew were still breathing. "All right, team," Yara said, her voice cracking with the authority of one who'd just been elected captain of a sinking ship. "We've got a real alien mess on our hands. Suggestions?" Felix, still favoring his bruised ribs, sauntered over with the swagger of someone who'd just found a particularly sharp object in his boot. "How about we threaten it with a sternly worded letter? Yeah, and maybe throw in a passive-aggressive emoji or two," Leora added, not looking up from her increasingly chaotic doodles. Quinox hovered nearby, its gelatinous form pulsating with what could only be described as cosmic irritation. It communicated telepathically, a fact that did little to endear it to anyone who preferred their brain unprobed. Zane, who'd been wrestling with the alien device like it was a particularly stubborn octopus, finally spoke up. "We need to get creative. This thing is a nightmare, but every lock has its key." "You've been reading fortune cookies again," Felix quipped, earning a snort from Leora. "He's right," Yara interjected, brushing a hand through hair that had long since given up on behaving. "We need to think like humans. Be unpredictable." "Unpredictable, huh?" Felix mused, rubbing his chin with mock philosophical intent. "So like every plan we've ever had." "Exactly," Yara said, the slightest hint of a grin tugging at her lips. "We use our finest human quality, sheer, unadulterated chaos." Quinox quivered, probably questioning the wisdom of ever aligning with humans. If it could roll its eyes, Yara had no doubt it'd have done so by now. Zane tapped away at his console, a mad scientist in the throes of inspiration, or madness. "If we can disrupt the device's programming with sequences it can't predict, we might just buy ourselves some time." Yara nodded, feeling the glimmer of a plan forming amidst the static. "So, we hit it with everything we've got. Throw random inputs into the system. Overwhelm it. Like a toddler with a smartphone," Felix said, grinning wickedly. "Or an art student with a blank canvas," Leora added, finally looking up from her abstract masterpiece. "Messy, unpredictable, and probably a bit offensive." The lights flickered again, a gentle reminder that their time was running out faster than Felix's bar tab on a Friday night. The station's malfunctions were like clockwork, chaos with a strict schedule. "All right," Yara said, clapping her hands together with the enthusiasm of a motivational speaker at a nihilism conference. "Let's give it a go. Zane, start randomizing those inputs." "On it," Zane replied, fingers a blur over the console as he unleashed a torrent of nonsense into the alien device, a digital stream of consciousness with all the coherence of a fever dream. Quinox pulsed an array of colors that could have meant anything from "you're all insane" to "I suppose this might work." Telepathy, it seemed, had its limits. As the alien device sputtered and whirred, Leora leaned over to Felix. "Think it'll explode?" Felix shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes. Hey, I've made peace with dying in a freak accident. It's practically a family tradition. Yara kept her eyes on the screen, watching as the device reacted to their input. There was a logic to human unpredictability, a chaotic dance that machines struggled to emulate. They were improvising jazz musicians with nothing but the void as their audience. "We're getting some feedback," Zane announced, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. "The device is struggling to keep up. I think we're onto something." "Well, let's hope it's not a one-way ticket to oblivion," Felix said, managing a lopsided grin despite the tension. The station groaned around them, a mechanical echo of the stress they all felt. It was a reminder that they were balancing on the edge of disaster, one wrong move away from becoming a cautionary tale. "Keep it up," Yara urged, her focus unyielding. "This might just work." Felix turned to Yara with a sly smile. "You know, if this actually pans out, I'm going to start charging for motivational speeches. Maybe you'll finally pay off those debts," Yara shot back, not missing a beat. The banter was a lifeline, a buoy in the storm of uncertainty. It kept them grounded, reminded them that they were still alive, still fighting. And fight they did, pouring everything they had into this wild gamble. As the alien device continued to process the nonsensical inputs, the station's systems began to stabilize. It was like watching a drunkard regain their footing, wobbly, but somehow managing to stay upright. "Looks like we're winning," Zane said, disbelief coloring his tone. "The device is backing off." "Of course we are," Felix replied, winking at Leora. "We're humans, we're stubborn bastards." Leora chuckled, a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "I think we just redefined Hail Mary Pass." Yara allowed herself a moment of hope, a rare commodity in a place where despair was the standard currency. They'd managed to turn the tide, if only for a moment, but it was enough, a chance to breathe, to regroup, to fight another day. "All right," Yara said, stealing a glance at the alien device, which now seemed more confused than threatening. "We need to keep this up. Don't let it adapt." Zane nodded, already working on the next round of inputs. "We'll keep it guessing." Felix leaned back, finally allowing himself to relax a fraction. "You know, I think I'm starting to like this whole winging it approach." "Don't get too comfortable," Yara warned, though her smile betrayed her relief. "We've still got a long way to go." The team settled into a rhythm, each member playing their part in this impromptu symphony of chaos. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were all in, fighting for the one thing that mattered: survival. In the flickering light of the teleportation hub, Yara watched her teamwork, feeling a swell of pride. They might be outmatched, outgunned, and perpetually out of luck, but they had heart. And sometimes, in the grim dark of space, heart was all you had. The teleportation hub was alive with the sounds of chaos, like a drunken orchestra desperately trying to tune its instruments. Sparks leapt from malfunctioning conduits, casting wild shadows that danced across the walls. It was the kind of place that screamed health hazard in a dozen languages, but Yara Kestrel had long since stopped worrying about minor things like safety. "All right, everyone," Yara announced, her voice as authoritative as a drill sergeant who'd misplaced their whistle. "It's time to unleash our secret weapon, a creative virus." Felix, leaning heavily on a nearby console, winced as he shifted his weight. "Creative virus, huh? Sounds like something out of a bad sci-fi novel. Or a really expensive art exhibit," Leora chimed in, her tone dripping with irony. Her latest doodle had transformed into a chaotic masterpiece, much like her sense of humor. Zane, the resident tech wizard with a penchant for turning the impossible into the merely improbable, tapped furiously at his keyboard. He was the kind of guy who could hack a toaster to brew synth coffee, usually with only a minor risk of electrocution. "I've got the framework ready," he said, not looking up from his work. "And what exactly does this creative virus do?" Felix asked, managing to sound both curious and skeptical, a skill he'd mastered after years of dodging responsibility. Zane glanced up, his eyes alight with the kind of manic enthusiasm usually reserved for mad scientists and people who genuinely enjoyed company team-building exercises. It randomizes inputs, creates unexpected patterns, and generally makes a mess of the alien tech. Think of it as digital jazz, but with fewer trumpets and more chaos. Sounds like every plan we've ever had, Felix muttered, though his grin suggested he wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. Quinox, their gelatinous companion, hovered nearby, its form shifting through a spectrum of colors that Yara could only assume were reflective of deep philosophical contemplation, or maybe just mild confusion. Telepathy was a hell of a drug. The alien device, nestled within the bowels of the station like a particularly stubborn parasite, blinked and whirred with ominous intent. It was the kind of machine that would have given Skynet an inferiority complex. "All right, Zane," Yara said, focusing on the task at hand. "Let's get this show on the road. Unleash the virus." Zane nodded, his fingers a blur as he executed the program. The console beeped in protest, as if aware that it was being asked to participate in something thoroughly unorthodox. Here goes nothing. The virus spread like wildfire through the alien device's software, each digital note a discordant melody designed to keep the machine on its metaphorical toes. The device sputtered, its lights flickering in what Yara hoped was a sign of confusion. "If it starts playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I'm out," Felix warned, leaning back to watch the show. Leora snorted, crossing her arms. "You're just afraid it'll be a better performer than you." The station groaned once more, the sound akin to an elderly giant trying to rise from a particularly uncomfortable chair. Yara held her breath, waiting for the inevitable backlash. Instead, nothing exploded, yet. "Zane, any feedback?" Yara asked, eyes fixed on the display. "It's working," Zane replied, sounding almost surprised. "The device can't keep up with the inputs. It's glitching out." "Good," Yara said, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Keep it up." For a moment, it seemed like they might actually pull it off. Then the station's intercom crackled to life, a voice like gravel on glass coming through the speakers. "Attention, all personnel, we have a problem." "Great," Felix sighed. "Because we didn't have enough of those," the voice continued, undeterred by Felix's sarcasm. "The station's power levels are fluctuating. If we don't stabilize the output, it's going to fry us like a bug under a magnifying glass." "Comforting," Leora remarked, her expression matching her sardonic tone. Yara turned to Quinox, who had been uncharacteristically silent throughout the ordeal. "Quinox, any chance you can help us out here with some telepathic magic?" The gelatinous alien shimmered, and for a brief moment, Yara wished she could understand whatever cosmic wisdom it was imparting. Instead, she got a distinct sensation of curiosity, almost like a mental nudge. "Okay," Yara said, seizing the opportunity. "Quinox, if you can figure out how to reroute power or stabilize it telepathically, we'd really appreciate it." Quinox pulsed a shade of deep indigo, the alien equivalent of a nod, perhaps. Yara had learned early on that interpreting Quinox's emotional palette was an art form she'd never fully master. But if there was one thing she could count on, it was the alien's willingness to help, even if it meant indulging in human-style chaos. Meanwhile, the alien device was putting on a light show that would have put any rave to shame. It blinked, whirred, and occasionally emitted sounds that Yara could only describe as electronic hiccups. "Looks like it's still buying us time," Zane reported, his fingers never pausing. "But we need to stabilize the power output fast." "I'm on it," Quinox conveyed, its form rippling with determination. Yara watched as Quinox centered itself, its form elongating and contracting in a rhythm that somehow felt both alien and natural. The alien was focusing, channeling whatever esoteric energy it had to manipulate the station's systems. The lights around them flickered, then took on a softer, more stable glow. It was like watching a storm calm to a gentle drizzle, only with fewer chances of getting drenched. Quinox's efforts were clearly working, but the strain was evident, its form losing some cohesion as it concentrated on maintaining the balance. Felix, ever the opportunist, took a moment to lean in toward Yara. You think it can hear us when we're thinking about its help? Probably, Yara replied, the corner of her mouth twitching upwards. Good thing it doesn't understand sarcasm. Zane's console beeped as he continued to monitor the situation. We're holding steady for now, but this won't last forever. Then let's use the time wisely, Yara commanded, refocusing her team. Keep the pressure on the device. We need to give Quinox all the help we can. Leora, for once, was silent, her usual quips replaced by a rare moment of genuine concentration. It was almost unsettling, like seeing a cat pass up a saucer of cream. The atmosphere in the hub was tense, the air crackling with the promise of either success or disaster. It reminded Yara of the final moments before a high-stakes poker hand, where the outcome hinged on a single card. You know, Felix mused aloud, if we survive this, I'm going to start a religion dedicated to human stubbornness. And what will you call it? Yara asked, genuinely curious. Felix grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. Church of Holy Improv. Patron saints, anyone who ever made it up as they went along. Zane snorted, the sound cutting through the tension like a lifeline. Count me in. I'll be the first to preach the gospel of winging it. Despite herself, Yara laughed. It was a small sound, but it carried the weight of the universe. Hope, camaraderie, the absurdity of their situation. She'd take that over despair any day. The alien device, still reeling from their virus attack, began to flicker erratically, its lights dimming in a final act of surrender. It was like watching a bully finally get a taste of their own medicine, and Yara couldn't help but feel a surge of vindictive satisfaction. Looks like the virus is doing its job, Zane reported, a touch of disbelief in his voice. We're destabilizing it. Let's keep it up, Yara urged, her confidence growing. Quinox, how are we doing on power? The alien pulsed a hopeful shade of emerald, conveying an impression that things were under control, for the moment at least. Yara knew better than to count her chickens before they hatched. In space, chickens had a nasty habit of exploding unexpectedly. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to dream of victory. As the alien device's lights sputtered and died, an eerie silence descended over the hub. It was the kind of quiet that suggested the universe had just momentarily forgotten to keep spinning. Did we do it? Felix asked, almost afraid to hope. Yara looked around, taking in the sight of her crew, her family, and the once menacing device now as lifeless as a bad joke at a funeral. Yeah, she said, her voice firm. I think we did. Zane slumped back in his chair, relief washing over his features. I'll drink to that. You always drink to everything, Leora quipped, her humor returning as the tension broke. Well, this time it's on me, Felix announced, a rare gesture of generosity. Assuming we're not about to blow up, of course. Quinox shimmered in agreement, its form stabilizing as the strain of its efforts eased. The alien had come through for them, proving that in the darkest depths of space, even the most unlikely allies could become friends. Yara looked at her crew, her heart swelling with a pride that warmed her more than any star ever could. They'd fought, they'd bled, and they'd stubbornly refused to go quietly into that good night. Maybe the universe was a bleak, uncaring place, but here, in their little corner of it, they'd carved out a victory, and that was something worth celebrating. As the lights flickered back to life with a steady hum, Yara Kestrel knew one thing for sure. They'd fight again because in the grim darkness of space, hope was as vital as oxygen. And right now, they had just enough of both. The Elysium Nexus hub hummed back to life, a mechanical Lazarus defying the odds. The lights flickered in a rhythmic dance, as if to say, we're not dead yet, casting soft shadows that swayed like they were at a drunken wake. A fitting sight, considering most stations would be having a solemn ceremony for the dead, but here it was cause for celebration. Yara looked around, absorbing the orchestrated chaos. Her team, no, her crew, stood amidst the carnage they'd narrowly avoided, each wearing expressions ranging from relief to disbelief. She hated to admit it, but she'd grown fond of this ragtag bunch of misfits. like a dysfunctional family that bickered over dinner but would still bury a body for you if needed. You know, Felix started, stretching his arms over his head, I half expected we'd be floating in space debris by now. Still time for that, Leora quipped, casually inspecting her nails like the potential for explosive decompression was just another Tuesday. The alien device, now as harmless as a defanged cobra, lay dormant in the corner, its malfunctions a thing of the past. It would serve as a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of space, Murphy's Law had a permanent residency. Zane shuffled over, his expression a cocktail of satisfaction and exhaustion. I can't believe it actually worked. We outsmarted alien tech with a virus I wrote in my underwear. You write all your code in your underwear, Yara reminded him, arms crossed, leaning against a console like she was posing for a noir film poster. It's terrifying to think how close we came to being cosmic dust. Quinox floated nearby, its form stabilizing into a pleasant shade of turquoise. If Yara had to guess, she'd say the alien was feeling serene, perhaps even exhilarated. Telepathic jelly beans were hard to read, but she'd gotten used to its peculiarities. A successful mission, Captain. Quinox's thoughts echoed in Yara's mind, smooth as silk. Despite its unearthly appearance, the alien had become a key member of their unit, its abilities both inscrutable and indispensable. Yeah, Quinox, Yara replied aloud, her voice carrying a warmth she usually reserved for synth coffee. Couldn't have done it without you, or without the rest of us risking life and limb, Felix interjected, ever the self-appointed voice of reason. Though I think my limbs deserve a raise. Good luck with that, Yara snorted. The pay here is terrible. In fact, it's non-existent. Typical, Felix sighed, adopting a posture of dramatic resignation. We're brilliant enough to save the station but not to negotiate a decent wage. You could always unionize, Leora suggested with a grin. The union of underpaid saviors. As the banter rolled on, Yara's gaze drifted to the teleportation gate chamber, now eerily quiet like a beast finally sated. The raw energy that had once been a ticking time bomb was pacified, thanks to their efforts. She wondered how long it would last before the station threw another tantrum. Yara, Zane said, breaking her reverie. You thinking what I'm thinking, that we should get utterly plastered, she replied, half joking. Always, Zane grinned. But no, I meant about the creative virus. It's not just a tool, it could be a safeguard. A way to keep the station from self-destructing every time it gets a hiccup. Yara considered this, nodding slowly. Not a bad idea. We could weaponize it against any more of those alien surprises. That, or we might just end up creating sentient toasters, Felix added, ever the pessimist. Wouldn't that be our luck? Who wouldn't want a toaster that talks back? Leora chimed in. More sass at breakfast, Yara chuckled. We could always use more sass, she conceded, exhaling deeply. But seriously, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. We need to find a way to harness this unpredictability. Quinox shimmered a rosy hue, its thoughts a gentle nudge of agreement. The balance between chaos and order is delicate. To preserve creativity, one must accept the risk of the unknown. Wise words, Jelly Bean, Yara acknowledged. It's what makes us human, I guess. That and our stubborn refusal to die quietly. Speak for yourself, Felix muttered. I'd prefer my demise to involve a lot less drama. Dream on, Leora teased, elbowing him playfully. You wouldn't know what to do without the theatrics. As the crew gathered their wits and began the laborious task of piecing the aftermath together, Yara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had been a rough ride, filled with close calls and hard choices. But amidst the chaos, they'd learned something invaluable, the art of improvisation. In the silence that followed, she realized that they'd done more than just save the station. They'd preserved a piece of what made them human, the creativity to adapt, to innovate, and to laugh in the face of oblivion. Here's to us, Yara declared, raising an imaginary glass. To the survivors and the stubborn. The others joined her, raising their own invisible glasses in the space between them. To the unpredictable, Zane added with a smirk. May it never catch us off guard. And to the power of imagination, Leora concluded, her eyes bright with mischief. May it forever keep us on our toes. Quinox pulsed a vibrant shade of gold, conveying a sentiment of hope and camaraderie. It had found a place among them, an ambassador of peace and understanding in a universe that often felt anything but. As the station settled into a semblance of normalcy, the crew turned their attention to the future. There were systems to repair, protocols to establish, and a whole galaxy of chaos to navigate. But for now, they were content to revel in their victory, however temporary. They'd faced the abyss and emerged victorious, armed with nothing more than a virus, a gelatinous friend, and a stubborn refusal to quit. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't much, but in the vast, uncaring universe, it was everything. The Elysium Nexus would continue to be a magnet for trouble, a beacon of dysfunction in the cosmos, and they wouldn't have it any other way. For within its flickering lights and sputtering conduits lay the heart of something extraordinary, a testament to human tenacity, humor, and creativity. As Yara stood with her crew, she knew they'd continue to face the unknown, armed with nothing more than their wits and a devil-may-care attitude. Because in the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about living, truly living, in a universe that wanted nothing more than to see them fail. With a final glance at the now-dormant alien device, she turned away, confident in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. And if fate had anything to say about it, they'd probably be laughing all the way. So here's to the misfits, the rebels, and the dreamers. In the grimdark void of space, they were the ones who dared to defy the odds, armed with nothing but grit, humor, and a touch of madness. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.